Welcome to your deep dive. Today we're gonna dive into like a true classic. Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. So if you are out there and looking to really sharpen those people skills, well, we've sifted through Carnegie's wisdom, and I think we've pulled out the golden nuggets, the stuff that's gonna resonate most with you guys.
Yeah, it's just remarkable how relevant this book still is.
Mm-hmm.
It was written almost a century ago, but it's still so applicable to today's world. And we're going to be exploring those timeless principles, and bringing them to life with real examples straight from the book.
Yeah, and I think what you're going to get out of this is some really cool, actionable insights that you can use right away to understand what makes people tick and how to forge those genuine connections.
It's really fascinating is the origin story of this book. It didn't come from some, ivory tower theory. It came from an actual need.
Yeah, back in the 1930s, the University of Chicago and the YMCA, they teamed up to try to figure out what adults really wanted to learn. What were they craving?
And health was at the top of the list, but right behind it was something totally unexpected.
People skills?
People skills. Understanding people, getting along with them, winning them over,
Yeah.
was a close second. And everybody was kind of surprised.
But you think about it, it makes total sense, right? I mean, whether it's at work, at home, or even just, trying to get your point across, as people skills are essential.
And Dale Carnegie saw this huge gap. People wanted this information, but there was no real practical guidance. So he spent years researching. He even interviewed some big names like Thomas Edison and Franklin D. Roosevelt, and then he wrote this book.
Yeah, so it's not just, theory. It's like battle-tested wisdom. And that brings us to one of the most, I think, striking stories in the book, the one about Two Gun Crowley.
Yeah, Two Gun Crowley. He's a notorious gangster. And what's so fascinating is that even when he was facing the electric chair, he refused to take any blame for his actions. He actually saw himself as the victim. He even said, this is what I get for defending myself.
Wow.
Of course, that's like an extreme case.
Sure.
But it just points to a human tendency, that deep-seated need that we all have to justify our actions even when we know we're wrong.
Yeah.
And that's where Carnegie's first principle comes in. Avoid criticizing, condemning, or complaining. It's like, kicking a hornet's nest and expecting honey to come out.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even if you win an argument, you often lose something way more valuable: the other person's goodwill and respect. And think about the story of Patrick J. O'Hare, the salesman.
Oh, yeah.
He went from being this super argumentative guy to being a top salesman.
Yeah.
Just by learning to agree with customers, even when they were criticizing his product.
It's amazing.
Yeah. It's remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah.
Instead of arguing, he would find common ground. He'd say things like, "You're right, the Who's a truck is a good truck." That simple act of acknowledging their viewpoint just totally disarmed them and helped build rapport.
That's a powerful lesson right there.
It is.
In terms of understanding perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to win somebody over, start by seeing things from their side, even if you don't fully agree with them.
And that understanding of human nature leads us to another one of Carnegie's gems: the power of remembering and using names.
Yeah, it seems so simple, but you think about how good it feels when someone remembers your name. It's like you instantly feel seen and valued.
Carnegie actually calls it the sweetest sound a person can hear. And he even shares the story of Jim Farley. This guy was like a political mastermind who could reportedly call 50,000 people by their first names.
Oh, wow. Imagine the advantage.
I know. It wasn't some magical ability, though. It was a deliberate choice, a system. He made it a practice to repeat people's names during conversations. And he even used, little mental tricks to connect names and faces. He was invested in making that connection.
And even Napoleon III was famous for remembering names. He would politely ask for a name again if you missed it, or he'd ask for the spelling if it was unusual,
These little things, they really add up. That small effort to remember and use someone's name, it shows respect.
Yeah.
And it makes a huge impact on how they see you.
Speaking of making people feel valued, there's that story about the woman who gave away her beloved Packard car.
Oh, right. She gave it to a man who just simply admired it in her home. What's fascinating is that it wasn't some calculated move. It just happened organically in conversation.
Right.
Shows you how much we crave appreciation.
It does. And it reminds me of Eunice, the cafeteria worker.
Oh, yeah?
She completely transformed how she treated a customer just because he greeted her by name. It's a great example of how a small act of recognition can completely change how people feel and behave.
And speaking of recognition, Carnegie also emphasizes the magic of sincere praise and encouragement.
So important. And it's not about empty flattery. It's about genuinely appreciating people's strengths and letting them know that you see them.
Like the story of Chris, the shy boy, who blossomed when his teacher invited him to join the advanced class. She recognized his hidden potential and gave him the confidence to shine.
It's amazing how we have the power to inspire others just by expressing our belief in them. And it all starts with genuine, specific praise.
Speaking of being specific, remember that example of the young printer? His entire attitude shifted after his manager gave him specific praise, highlighting what he had done well.
It makes all the difference. Instead of just a generic good job, when you're specific, your praise becomes meaningful. It shows you're really paying attention. It reinforces the behavior you want to see more of.
And we connected to the bigger picture. That's the essence of Carnegie's message. To win friends and influence people, we need to shift our focus from ourselves to others, their needs, their interests, their perspectives.
Yeah, it's not about manipulation. It's about genuine understanding. Which leads us to another one of his principles, the importance of talking in terms of the other person's interests. Remember that salesman who won over a client by talking about gardening?
Oh, that's a classic example of how shifting the focus from yourself to the other person can really change the outcome. Instead of just pushing his product, he connected with the client on a personal level by tapping into his passion.
Yeah, it really highlights that people are way more likely to be receptive to your ideas if they see how those ideas benefit them.
It's about aligning your message with their needs and desires, making them feel heard and understood.
So what does this mean for you, the listener?
It means that by genuinely taking an interest in others, remembering their names, offering sincere praise, and speaking to their interests, you can unlock some amazing possibilities in your relationships.
So we've been talking about, really understanding people and their motivations, but what about when you need to actually guide them toward, a decision or an action? How do we do that?
Well, that's where Carnegie's insights into persuasion really come in. It's all well and good to understand people, but how do you actually put that into practice? How do you influence them?
Right. And one of the techniques I think that's really interesting is that idea of luring people to yes by starting with points of agreement.
It's such a smart strategy because it really helps defuse any resistance right from the start.
Right.
Instead of, jumping right into the point of disagreement, you start by highlighting the things you agree on. You build that foundation of shared understanding before you introduce anything that might be controversial.
Yeah, like that example we talked about with Carnegie himself negotiating the rent reduction from that really tough landlord. He didn't storm in and demand lower rent. He started by acknowledging the positive, the benefits that the landlord was already enjoying.
Exactly. By focusing on those points of agreement, he shifted the dynamic from confrontation to collaboration, and it made the landlord much more open to his requests.
It's a subtle shift, but it's so powerful.
It is.
And you can use it in so many situations, from business negotiations to disagreements with family members.
Absolutely.
It's all about setting that tone right. Like, hey, we're in this together.
Exactly.
But sometimes, even with the best intentions, people can be resistant to our ideas. So what do we do then?
Well, I think that's where Carnegie's advice about letting the other person do the talking really comes in.
Oh, yeah.
You remember that story about the salesman who lost his voice right before the big presentation?
Oh, yeah.
That's the perfect example of this in action. He could have panicked, but instead he used that silence to his advantage.
How did he do that?
Well, he basically turned that meeting into a listening session.
Yeah.
He encouraged the client to talk through their needs and their concerns. And just by actively listening and subtly guiding the conversation, he created this space where the client literally talked himself into the sale.
That's so interesting.
It is. It's so counterintuitive because, we feel this urge to dominate conversations, to make our arguments really forcefully. But sometimes the most persuasive approach is to step back and let the other person convince themselves.
Yeah, it's like giving them that sense of ownership over the decision, right?
Exactly. They feel like they've arrived at this conclusion on their own. It takes a lot of patience and finesse, but it can be really effective.
It can be.
But, sometimes we mess up. We push too hard. We misread a situation. We say the wrong thing. And then what?
Yeah, and in those moments, I know it can be tempting to, just double down and defend your position even more forcefully.
Right. But Carnegie suggests something totally different. He says, admit your mistakes.
I have to admit, this is one I struggle with. No one likes to say I was wrong.
It's hard.
But Carnegie says that owning up to our mistakes, quickly and sincerely can actually disarm the other person and create this opening for resolution.
It's like letting the air out of a balloon. All that tension and defensiveness just goes away.
That's a great analogy.
Think about that story of the guy who got that crazy inflated bill from the repairman. Instead of arguing, he acknowledged that, you know, things had been mishandled, and he apologized for the inconvenience.
What happened?
The repairman was totally caught off guard by that.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, he reduced the bill significantly, and they parted ways amicably. No hard feelings. It's amazing how a little humility can go such a long way.
It really can. By admitting we're not perfect, we show that we're not trying to win at all costs.
Right. It creates space for understanding and forgiveness, and it paves the way for a much more collaborative outcome.
So how do we apply all of this, in real life?
That's the question, isn't it?
Because life isn't always this perfectly structured negotiation.
Right.
So how do we handle those everyday interactions where it's not always appropriate to just lay all our cards on the table?
That's where the art of indirect suggestion comes in.
Oh, tell me more about that.
So it's about subtly guiding someone towards a particular outcome without making them feel like they're being controlled or manipulated.
Okay.
Remember, Carnegie used that analogy of the gardener planting seeds.
Oh, yeah.
You can't force a seed to grow right, but you can create the conditions that allow it to thrive.
Right.
And when we're talking about people, those conditions often involve, subtle suggestions, positive reinforcement, a genuine belief in their ability to grow.
Okay, I like that.
You remember that music teacher who wanted her student to trim her fingernails?
Oh, yeah, those long nails.
Instead of just, giving her a direct order, which could have been really critical and controlling, she made the suggestion indirectly.
How?
Well, she complimented the beauty of the student's hands, and then she framed the suggestion as a way to, enhance her musical potential.
That's so clever.
There's a gentle nudge in the right direction, and it worked.
It did.
So it's all about planting that seed, nurturing the environment, and trusting that the person will eventually blossom, in the direction you've gently guided them.
It's like we're all gardeners in a way.
We are.
But, sometimes we need a little more than just a gentle nudge. Sometimes we need to really grab people's attention.
That's true. And that's where the power of dramatization comes in. Carnegie was a big believer in making ideas come alive, engaging people's emotions, their imaginations.
Greasy.
He believed that, just dry facts and figures rarely move people to action.
Yeah.
You got to make those ideas visceral and memorable.
Oh, like that salesman who dumped all those jars of cold cream on the client's desk.
Exactly. That was a bold move.
It was.
Maybe a little dramatic, but it got the point across.
It did. It really drove home that message about the competition.
And sometimes you need that little bit of drama.
Yeah.
A well-placed anecdote, a striking image, or even just a thought-provoking metaphor. It helps your message cut through all the noise and become unforgettable.
Yeah, it's about connecting on an emotional level, not just an intellectual one.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really important principle, one that I think is at the heart of Carnegie's philosophy.
Okay, what's that?
It's the importance of appealing to people's nobler motives.
What do you mean by that?
Carnegie believed that deep down, most people want to be good. They want to be honest. They want to be fair. They want to make a positive contribution to the world.
I think that's true.
And by appealing to those qualities, we can inspire them to live up to their own best selves.
So it's like we're appealing to their better angels.
Exactly.
I like that.
Remember the story of the man who, instead of arguing with his customer about the bill, he just simply asked the customer to adjust it fairly.
Yeah.
He appealed to the customer's sense of honesty and integrity.
And it worked.
It worked beautifully. The customer not only adjusted the bill, but he became a loyal customer for years to come.
It's amazing how sometimes just giving people the opportunity to do the right thing can have such a powerful effect.
It really is. It's about creating win-win situations where everyone feels good about the outcome, where actions and values are aligned.
Right. So how else can we motivate people, to really get them on board with our ideas?
Well, one thing that Carnegie emphasizes is giving people a sense of ownership and participation. He believed that when people feel like they're part of the process, their energy and their enthusiasm just go through the roof. So it's about involving them in the decision-making, getting their ideas, making them feel like their contributions matter.
I like that.
You remember that executive who was facing that really challenging order?
Yeah.
Instead of dictating a solution, he brought his employees into the conversation.
Oh, that's great.
He asked for their input, their insights, their solutions.
And how did they respond?
They responded brilliantly.
Yeah.
They came up with creative ideas, and they tackled that challenge with, renewed sense of purpose.
That's awesome.
So it's a powerful reminder that, collaboration and empowerment are so much more effective than just command and control.
Absolutely. Now, before we move on to the last part of our deep dive, I want to touch on something we mentioned earlier,
Okay.
the ethics of influencing others.
Yes, it's so
Because
important.
we've learned about all these powerful techniques,
We have.
but we need to make sure we're using them responsibly.
We do. Carnegie's techniques are incredibly powerful, but they need to be used for good. The goal is to empower people to lift them up, not to manipulate or exploit them for our own gain.
Exactly. It all comes down to intention, right? Are we trying to create win-win situations where everyone benefits? Are we genuinely interested in other people's well-being? Or are we just trying to get what we want no matter the cost?
Those are the questions we have to ask ourselves. As we explore the final part of Carnegie's wisdom, we'll dig a bit deeper into those ethical considerations. Welcome back to your deep dive into how to win friends and influence people. We've been exploring all these incredible principles from Dale Carnegie, but as we wrap things up, I think it's really important to talk about how to use them responsibly, ethically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From really understanding other people's perspectives to that whole art of persuasion. But with these techniques comes a responsibility to use them, for good, not just for personal gain. I think that's what separates influence from manipulation, right?
I completely agree. Influence is about empowering people, guiding them toward decisions that ultimately benefit everyone. Manipulation is about using those tricky tactics to get what you want, often at the expense of others.
It's a fine line for sure. So how can we make sure that we're staying on that ethical side of influence as we're applying Carnegie's principles?
That's the big question, isn't
Yeah.
it? Well, I think one major red flag is when you're only focused on your own needs and your own desires. If you're going into every interaction thinking, what can I get out of this?
Yeah,
Then you're probably, you're slipping into that manipulative territory.
right. It's like that salesman who kept trying to sell bread to the hotel manager. He was so focused on his own product, his own pitch, that he didn't even try to understand what the manager actually needed or cared about.
Exactly. It wasn't until he shifted his focus and actually, genuinely connected with the manager's passion for gardening that he finally closed that deal. Understanding the other person's perspective, their goals, their needs, that's where ethical influence starts.
Okay, so step one is to really make that effort to see things from their side.
Absolutely. And once you understand where they're coming from, then you can start thinking about how to frame your message, in a way that aligns with their interests.
Yeah.
But it has to be authentic. You can't fake it.
Yeah, people can spot a phony a mile away.
They can. It's like that saying, flattery will get you nowhere.
Yeah.
People can tell when you're being genuine and when you're just trying to, butter them up.
Right.
So instead of using empty flattery, focus on finding something that you genuinely admire or appreciate about the other person. And be specific. Generic compliments just don't have the same impact.
Like that manager who praised the young printer's work, he didn't just say good job, he actually pinpointed the specific things that impressed him.
Right. And that made the praise so much more meaningful and encouraging.
It did. So to sum up, I guess ethical influence really comes down to a few key things.
It does.
One, being genuinely interested in the other person.
2, understanding their perspective and what matters to them.
3, framing your message in a way that truly aligns with their interests.
And 4, offering sincere, specific praise and encouragement.
If we can keep all that in mind, then we can use Carnegie's techniques, not just to achieve our own goals, but to build those stronger, more authentic relationships and ultimately make a positive impact on the people around us.
That's what it's all about,
Holy moly.
lifting each other up, inspiring each other, creating those win-win situations where everyone feels good.
I like that.
And as we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to leave you with one last thought from Carnegie. He said, you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you.
Such a powerful reminder that genuine connection is at the heart of everything. It's not about self-promotion, it's about truly understanding other people.
So go out there, make some friends, influence some people, and make the world a little bit brighter, one connection at a time.
That concludes your deep dive into how to win friends and influence people. We hope you've learned some great stuff that you can take with you and apply in your own life. And until next time, keep those connections strong. Welcome to your deep dive.